I am Jacquelin Apsler, the Executive Director of Domestic Violence Services Network, or DVSN, and we're really pleased to have you with us at our very first speaker series event, where we'll be looking at the chaos of COVID and its impact on our clients and on so many others in need. This series is an outgrowth of our annual appreciation breakfast. Many of you have attended that with us, where we thank you for your support, whether it be financial, the time and talent of our volunteers, the incredible collaboration we have from our community colleagues, and all of the referrals and support we get from our first responder partners. It really is a wonderful gathering that we love to do every year, but unfortunately, with COVID, obviously, we cannot do that this year. We did feel strongly that one of the pieces of our breakfast, which is an education component where we bring in speakers or have a panel speak to you about the various aspects of domestic violence, was an important component to continue. So we decided to develop this speaker series this year in order to be able to continue that appreciation and that thank you for everything you give us, that we would give back to you some information, some education, and some awareness of the issue in its complexity. As I said to you before, the technology we're using is new, as well as the speaker series, and we have a really terrific team behind us working on everything, and the team is here to do whatever is needed if we do have any other glitches. So I'm asking for your patience in ahead of the problems, and we'll go from there. But I'm very, very thrilled to be able to present our first event tonight. We also want you to know that we are recording this presentation, and we will be sending this presentation, the recording of it, a list of relevant resources, and contact information for each of the panelists will be emailed to everyone who registered for this program. In addition to that, we have a Q&A opportunity for you. Questions and comments we would welcome and invite for you to put it in the Q&A. On my screen, it's at the bottom. Depending on the device you're using, it may be in another position on your device. But please don't hesitate to put questions and answers or comments into that particular box, and we will follow up with them after the presentations. So why is it that we are actually picking this particular topic tonight? What are we seeing? We're being asked all the time, what are we seeing with our clients? What's happening for them? What's happening with COVID? How is that impacting them? I think everyone is well aware of the fact that clients are often trapped with their abusive partner in the situation that we're living with today. And even if they're not actually living with an abusive partner, they're certainly kind of locked in and easily accessible to that abusive partner. So we see that for sure. At the beginning of the shutdown, we actually had a decrease to some extent in the clients that we were receiving or were asking for help. But in fact, over the last 10 months, they have significantly increased. At any point in time, when we look at a period of time and compare it to the year before, we're now looking at anywhere from 15 to over 20% increase over the same time for the year before. We're also seeing cases that are incredibly more brutal. They're more egregious. The people who are reaching out for help and taking that risk to reach out for help are in fact doing so because they are in a horrific situation. So that's what we're seeing in terms of that increase as well. Also, with this type of experience for them and the kind of horror that they're living with, we're having much longer contacts with each of our clients. Each contact is longer. And anytime we've looked at any of that in terms of, again, comparison to the year before, we're looking at well over 20 to 25% longer contacts with each client. The good news is that our clients feel really grateful and are absolutely relieved tremendously that we're there for them, that we've been there through the entire shutdown and will continue to be so going forward. We have a dedicated core of about 12 advocates. We used to have 70. We still have, 58 on hiatus, so to speak, because of their ages and their risks for COVID. They need to be working from home or staying home. And our other clients, our other advocates are coming in and actually reaching out to the clients, and that's worked very well for us. So our clients are grateful that we're there for them, that we can listen to them, that we can help them plan for safety as much as possible in this difficult time, and that we can connect them to rich array, actually, of resources that are still available to them out in the community. What we're seeing, though, are the same barriers that we've seen always with clients, the barriers to disclosing, the barriers to being able to change that situation or escape from an abusive situation. And the one that's really ramped up tremendously is their struggle with basic needs. They really are having a huge problem with having enough food. Their income is significantly reduced or eliminated. They're all facing, so not all, but most of them are facing housing insecurity. And many of them, a large proportion of them, are really struggling with how to deal with their children and their children's issues around schooling and mental health, and just feeling like they're trapped and not understanding why they're there in terms of the children. And so all of this is leading to even greater mental health issues than we might have seen in the past. None of these are new issues. It's just the significant increase and magnitude of them has become a major stumbling block to them being able to plan for safety or being able to make a change that would put them in better situation. The hallmark of our work as DVSN is really our collaboration with our colleagues. It's that collaboration that allows us to provide the best services, the best programs, and the most safety for our clients. That's with our first responder partners, and it's especially with our community colleagues that help us develop programs and develop services that best meet these needs. We can't do it all in-house, so we do it with all of these partners. We're incredibly fortunate tonight to be able to have with us 3 of our very special colleagues and partners that are going to talk to you about what they're seeing in the work, what they're seeing in terms of the issues with clients that we share, what they're seeing in terms of these very intersectional kinds of issues that our people are facing, and all of the ways in which we're trying to meet the needs that are so basic and so incredibly important in order to be able to get them to a point where they feel more self-sufficient and more able to make a change. Our first speaker tonight will be Bethany Hadvab, a licensed independent clinical social worker who serves the Sudbury community as the Board of Health social worker for the last 5 years. She has a background in trauma-informed care. She has served as a therapist, a case manager, a community organizer, and clinical director in a variety of settings, including municipalities, therapeutic schools, residential facilities, and outpatient clinics. Bethany's goals as a social worker are to foster hope, growth, and self-sufficiency. Our second speaker is Jeanine Calabria, Executive Director of Open Table, addressing hunger and food insecurity. She has transformed and professionalized the 32-year-old grassroots organization, blending 740 volunteers and a 3-person management team and part-time staff. Jeanine believes that all people should have access to healthy food and has built a robust mobile program, bringing food to people rather than people to food. In 2017, she successfully co-led the capital campaign to purchase Open Table's very first facility in Maynard, and most recently, the purchase of adjacent office space. This year, Jeanine hopes to double the number of nutritious prepared meals and will focus additional resources on supporting the food needs of essential workers who constantly risk their own health to serve others. Our third speaker is Detective Ian Spencer, who has served with the Lincoln Police Department for 16 years. Since 2010, he's been the liaison for the Lincoln Public Schools, the Lincoln Sudbury Regional High School, Minuteman Regional Technical High School, the Carroll School, and the Birches School. Ian collaborates regularly with administrators, social workers, psychologists, and students. He serves on a variety of school-based committees and advisory groups that address racism, inequity, and school safety and security. Ian is also an FBI-trained forensic artist. He supports investigators across New England with the creation of forensic images used to assist in the identification of suspected criminals. He holds a master's degree in criminal justice from LaSalle University, and he's probably one of the only, if not the only, police officers who was an undergraduate art major. We are very pleased to have with us this incredible human being, these incredible human beings, and amazing professionals, and all of them very good friends of ours, with us tonight to share with you their perspectives and their work. And now we'll begin with Bethany Hadvab, social worker with Sudbury's Board of Health.
you, Jackie. What a beautiful and heartwarming introduction.
Well, you know I love you guys.
I know, back at you. Working with DVSN has been incredible over these past 5 years. I'm Bethany Hadvab. I'm the social worker for the Sudbury Board of Health, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. And in the time that I've been working for the Board of Health, I've worked with many males and females who have experienced domestic violence. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what I've been seeing during that time. And I think something to keep in mind is that we're not just seeing, like Jackie was saying, the domestic violence that is occurring when people are living with their abuser, but we're also seeing people who are having continual emotional abuse or ongoing abusive situations when they're not residing with them. And we're seeing people who have experienced abuse in the past, and the trauma of the pandemic is bringing up that abuse. So we're having a lot more disclosures right now. So I know a lot of people on this call are names that I recognize and have some experience with domestic violence education, but I want to just start by talking a little bit about what is the definition of domestic violence and what does that look like before we talk about the impact of the pandemic on it. So oftentimes when people hear domestic violence, they think about physical or maybe a sexual assault. And they don't think of all of these other pieces that could be co-occurring that are equally detrimental to the way that somebody can live their life and function. So I see in my job a lot of emotional abuse where people are basically having their sense of self-worth destroyed every single day by an abuser. And when that happens over and over again, the belief that you can follow through on things, that you're worthy, that people care about you, that you are capable, diminishes over time. And we're going to look at the impact that that has. We also see a lot of use of intimidation or coercion or threats. We also see people who are utilizing children as a pawn. In Sudbury, we see a great deal of financial abuse as well. So I remember when I first came to Sudbury, I was connected with Jackie because I was seeing so many cases that almost felt like somebody was following it out of a textbook. One partner would take all of the money out of the family account, would slowly take away any power or control their partner had, take away their car, tell them they didn't need a job anymore, don't worry. They'd have multiple children. And then that person would pull out of the relationship, take all of the money, leave this shattered family, get a high-powered attorney so that the partner who had been abused had nothing and couldn't fight for themselves anymore. And I remember first coming to Jackie and realizing that DVSN was going to be a huge help to the work that we were doing. Like Jackie was saying, we don't work in a silo. We all work together and we pick up where the other person leaves off. So I'm going to have people keep kind of looking at this wheel as we talk about the impact of the pandemic. And like Jackie had said, it's increasing domestic violence. And one thing that we know is that the pandemic has left a lot of us feeling really powerless. And we know that DV is about power and control. So this is one way that people can reassert their power and control is by becoming abusive to their partner. So that's one reason why we're seeing that increase. We also have, like Jackie was talking about, that increased isolation that survivors are feeling, the impacted ability to get resources and supports, the increased mental health, the decreased self-esteem and feelings of self-worth, and also the additional challenges that are being created to leave an abusive situation. If it's not safe to go into somebody else's home or to go into a shelter because of COVID, it limits people's ability to leave, but it also limits people's access to other people like doctors, teachers, nurses, social workers who might see them in person on a regular basis and be able to identify that there is a need and connect them with resources. And thinking about our most vulnerable populations, children, seniors, person with disabilities, if they are very reliant on other people to meet their needs. And think of a senior or somebody who is homebound, who is reliant on a family member or a loved one to provide all of these services, who can determine what they can and can't eat, who they can and can't talk to, where they can and can't go, their access to medication and resources. And just think about how devastating that can potentially be. And I promise you we're going to get to a more hopeful place in all of this. And I will say that looking at this piece, it can feel very hopeless until you have a survivor in front of you who is navigating it, who isn't giving up, and who is putting their children and their loved ones first all the time to make sure that they are protected. I see that over and over again, and the resilience is just absolutely incredible. So we now have people who are experiencing domestic violence, and there may be the compounding trauma if they have experienced domestic violence in the past as well. Plus, we are all going through a global trauma right now. So I would guess that if most people looked at this web since March, they would identify with 3, 5, 10, all of these symptoms at some point during this pandemic, because that's what trauma is. Our body ends up trying to create a safe space for us by shutting down parts of our brain. And if you think of that fight or flight mode, where we go into we need to act or we're completely shutting down. So all of these symptoms, think of somebody sitting in front of you who's experienced domestic violence, who might be having a hard time with those executive functioning skills, having a hard time thinking, planning, focusing, following through on tasks. Maybe somebody who's engaging in some self-harm or self-destructive behaviors or substance abuse, is irritable, is isolated or avoiding. And if you're looking at the surface level of that and not at this trauma iceberg that lies underneath, it can be very easy to misinterpret those symptoms. And until we start to decrease the stigma around domestic violence and the stigma around trauma and bring an awareness and a trauma-informed understanding to the work that we do, it can be very easy for people to look at these symptoms and judge people and to say, well, what if they could just? Why can't they just fill out that SNAP application? Or why can't they just apply for housing? Or why can't they just get their kids together and leave? But then you look at this trauma web, right? And of course, if this is their brain's way of protecting themselves against the trauma and they are experiencing all of these devastating symptoms, it makes sense that there is no, of course, why can't they just ... It's sometimes humanly impossible to do some of the tasks that need to be done. So we've got this domestic violence, the trauma of that, the trauma of the pandemic, and on top of all of that, we're all experiencing grief right now as a part of this pandemic. So all of this is compounding. And when I say grief, I don't just mean death, although many people have experienced deaths during this pandemic, but also the loss of our routines, the loss of maybe a job or a career, loss of income and the powerlessness that comes along with that, the loss of our ability to socialize and have relationships with people, the loss of hugs, right? The loss of going to events and having plans and feeling safe and having a sense of certainty and a sense of purpose and having a space that is our own. Think of how many people, like Jackie was saying, are all locked in a small space together and how scary that can be if somebody is in a domestic violence relationship. And if we look at these stages of grief, some people will say it's a grief cycle. I say it's a grief pinball machine, because if you have ever, pinball machine, I can get that out. If you have ever played pinball, it's ping pong, ping pong, ping pong. And that's what grief is, right? We don't just experience one emotion. We are having this myriad of emotions flashing across our bodies very quickly. And if we look at grief symptoms and we look at the symptoms of trauma, again, there can be a lot of gaslighting that's going on with survivors of domestic violence. And there can also be a lot of judgment that's coming from society, as well as possibly some internal judgment that they're having of themselves because they've got these messages from their abuser that you're crazy because you're emotionally erratic, or you can't take care of the children because you can't remember that you were supposed to call me at 4:15. And then you have these compounding pieces that are coming together. So I think, again, think about those moments when you have somebody in front of you who has experienced these pieces and is able to manage to still get through every day and work and be a parent, and just how truly incredible that is as they're overcoming these pieces. So this is a diagram that shows a lot of what we are seeing now. The pandemic hits and people lost childcare because of childcare closing due to not being financially viable, or childcare closing because there was an outbreak of COVID, and then parents are losing their jobs and losing their income. Or parents lost their jobs because they have to remote school their children. And at the same time, people are feeling all of this social isolation, which is leading to the decline in their mental and emotional health, but also, again, those lack of resources and ability to access what they need in those moments, and the financial stress that comes from that job loss. And when people can't afford the things that they need, we're seeing so much food and housing insecurity. And in a few minutes, Jeanine is going to talk to you about all of the amazing ways that Open Table is working with the community to really provide thoughtful services to support people and provide services that give people options and choice. And we know that when we are traumatized or feeling very overwhelmed, giving people choice, giving people hopeful moments, focusing on people's strengths are all things that build resilience. And all of these pieces that you're looking here are what's leading to more increased domestic violence as well in the homes. So now we're going to move on to the more hopeful pieces, right? So how can we help? One thing is learning those signs, understanding what domestic violence is and isn't, and also understanding all those signs of trauma and what that really means, and having a deeper empathy for what a traumatized experience looks like when we're sitting across from somebody. And when I say providing a safe space in my next bullet point here, I know we can't always provide a physical space for people right now because of COVID, but providing a space where we are non-judgmental, where we are reducing that stigma by acknowledging people's strengths, by listening without judgment, by letting people have a voice and tell their story, not pushing people to tell what they don't want to tell, and really focusing on those moments of success and encouraging them and in providing affirmation. I think of the moments where a mom is sitting in front of me or is on the other end of that phone line and says, I am failing as a human being. And I say, you're not failing. You're traumatized by a pandemic and you're experiencing trauma symptoms from what you've gone through. And it was something that you had no control over. However, the last 5 minutes, you just talked to me about all the steps you've taken to ensure that your child feels safe and comfortable and feels validated and doesn't have the experience of having their self-worth destroyed in the way that you did, and giving them those skills to really have faith and confidence in themselves when it's really, really hard. So really taking those moments to validate the strengths that are there. On a more macro level, I've been doing a lot of work around supporting trauma-informed care. And that means understanding what trauma symptoms look like and what people can and can't do when they have experienced trauma, and what we need to do to support people to successfully make it through a traumatic situation. So for instance, SNAP, filling out housing applications, the 15-page fuel assistance application that's on 4 different fonts and 4 different paper sizes. Those aren't trauma-informed systems right now, right? So there's work that needs to be done and advocacy that needs to be done on that level to cut out the red tape, to make things simpler, to provide supports and services and case management for people who need the support of someone just walking that walk with them and acknowledging how difficult it is and that it's okay. And another thing we can do is donate to the domestic violence organizations that are doing this work when we're able to do so as well. Reducing stigma is huge when it comes to domestic violence. And some of the things that are really important are just paying attention to our language. Think of the difference between survivor and victim. I have never worked with a person who's experienced domestic violence who was a victim. Every single one of them is surviving every single day and is showing this resilience and beauty and strength in what they do. Also thinking about the words perpetrator or abuser versus somebody who engaged in violence, because keeping in mind that there are human beings on both sides of this equation. And if we forget the humanity of the person who's engaging in the abuse. We're stigmatizing that person who has also probably experienced violence in their own life or trauma, or didn't have the supports they needed during developmental stages of their lives. And it's not an either or. Either we have empathy for the survivor or we have empathy for the person who engaged in the violence. It's an and. We can see both of those people as humans, and we can still also be outraged by the abuse that occurs. And if we treat people and use language that acknowledges the humanity on both sides, we're more likely to reduce the stigma and more likely to see people accessing treatment resources, including people who have engaged in violence. Also, avoiding questions like blame questions like, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just think of your children? Why didn't you just ask for help? But then we think of all those trauma and grief symptoms, and that's why. Also, there's 10 million reasons why a person stays in a domestic violence situation that we are not privy to and will never be privy to, but we have to trust that people are the experts on their own lives, and we're there to walk that walk with them. And just keeping in mind that domestic violence is never the survivor's fault, but oftentimes the messages they're getting from society and the messages they got from their abuser is that it is their fault. So we just need to be conscious of the fact that the survivor and society is often blaming them, and being very conscious of creating that safe space. Also, survivors are enduring gaslighting and are at the end of not having the compassion that they need from society. And if we can offer that compassion and remain judgment-free and remember that domestic violence is complicated and there's no right way to solve a situation, that's ways that we can help as well. And just some last thoughts on hope. One of my favorite adages as a social worker is from crisis comes growth. And I'm sure that everybody watching right now has had some really challenging times that they've gone through in their lives where they have learned and grown and become stronger. And I see that every day with the individuals that I work with. And that's not to minimize what they are going through in any way, but to also realize that they learned so many skills to make it through something that you never thought a human being could or should be able to make it through. I know I talk about that resilience and just the resourcefulness, the creative ways that people find to make it through. And I learned so much from the clients and the residents that I work with, because every day they come in with these beautiful moments of things I would have never thought of because I wasn't in their situation. I'm also in my office so hopeful because of our community partners who I know I can turn to all the time, but I also know are there to walk this walk with our clients and understand and create that beautiful emotional space for our clients. So Domestic Violence Services Network, Gifts of Hope Unlimited, Voices Beyond Violence, Reach Beyond Violence are just a few of the agencies that we work with really regularly. And everybody who's on this call right now is also helping to reduce stigma by learning more, increasing our own knowledge, and by reducing stigma. Again, we open the door for people, both survivors and people who have engaged in violence, to be able to seek out help. So in terms of hope, we're now going to go on to Jeanine from Open Table, and she's going to share with us all the amazing adaptations that she has done during this pandemic to support people that we work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here tonight, Jacquelin. I am so pleased to be able to have heard both of your presentations. I look forward to hearing Ian's. I was asked this evening to share a little bit about the work that Open Table's been doing during this pandemic year, and I'm going to share my screen with all of you. So Open Table, when the pandemic started, really needed to do a big pivot. We wanted to make sure there was never, ever a break in our services, because now more than ever, people needed food. And we realized that the organization had to find new ways to get food to people. We have been working as a market, a grocery store where people could come in and shop, because we do believe that the way to reduce stigma and the way to respect people is for people to choose their own food. Who knows better than what you need to eat but yourself and for your family? And that was a very difficult thing that our organization had to navigate, letting go of original values that we had for choice, wanting to fresh air market. We realized safety was number one, and that being able to put food in the back of someone's truck or just give people a prepared meal, everything had to change so that people could access food in a way that was safe and supportive of the times. So our pantry, which you can see here, used to be a shopping kind of experience, moved to being outside of our parking lot, municipal parking lot behind our facility in Maynard. And people drove up and popped their trunk, and we put groceries in the back of the trunk. And what was great about that was how easy it was. And again, for people who were new to food insecurity, for people who were getting groceries for the very first time, this gave them anonymity. It was a very discreet way of getting food and allowed people to get good at efficiently, quickly, no questions asked. And the problem was at that point that the groceries that people received in the very beginning stages of the pandemic were what we could pack. Our process became very labor intensive as we packed groceries really quickly and put them in cars. I mean, there were hours and hours behind the actual pantry that went into packing everybody's groceries. If you think about going to a grocery store now, you go into the grocery store, you see a checker, and you might see somebody, a bagger, and that's about it. And we went from that to being a personal shopper for over 200 families a week. The other thing that happened with our food security response was leaving here you can see the packers. Sorry, probably should have forwarded that slide before. You can see this used to be what we showed people coming in. We had this beautiful produce, and then it went to the pack bags over here. We've got some wonderful volunteers packing those bags. That represents, the bags for one pantry represents about 15 hours worth of work to pack all those bags to get them ready in time. The other thing that happened during the pandemic was we had this lovely collaborative community meal where people sat down and shared their stories, and we went to packed or prepared meals. And one of the things that Open Table again had to sort of come to terms with was that the most important thing was to get food to people, and that our mission is to get food to people. And though we really missed having a community sit-down meal, the most important thing was for people to get their basic needs met. And that's what the prepared meal does, along with allowing families who are now juggling having their kids at home, maybe more work instead of less work if they're taking other kinds of jobs, isolation, etc. It allows them to have meals that they can open up and eat. They don't have to cook it on top of everything else that they're doing. So while we missed the community meal, it was something that really allowed people, supporting people in a very different way. We're very aware that in the past, we were sort of a stationary kind of program. Here we are, we have the food. And now we've moved to, well, that doesn't work for everybody, especially now. How can people get food if they are too afraid to leave their facility, if they're afraid of contracting the virus, if they now, instead of being able to come to Open Table alone, they have children in tow? So we really took a look at how we were doing our mobile pantry. We had received a grant to start launching a mobile pantry in April, never even knowing that the pandemic was going to be happening. And we're now looking at many different places where we can bring the food. Currently, we go to Hudson twice a month. That was a partnership and a collaboration with the Boys and Girls Club and the Hudson Health Department and Public Housing. We're bringing over 60 meals to the Acton COA once a week. And in Concord to the COA, there's a small pop-up pantry. And also we joined the school system for bringing our mobile meals to their food pantry, their drive-through food pantry. Now we're operating that during the winter months. And in Maynard, we operating with the Council of Aging, also getting food to people rather than the people coming to shop with us. So about September, we realized people stopped coming as often to Open Table. And that was a really interesting impact that packed bags have had. If you go home with a packed bag and you normally only need half the groceries in the bag and now you're getting double, you don't need to come to Open Table as often. We're hearing that some people were receiving food that may not be, again, apropos to their current health needs. And so we have been working really hard the past couple of weeks to go on to online ordering, making it even more secure for people to call up or go online and order the groceries that their families need in the quantities they need, and then selecting a pickup time that gives them more flexibility to come when they can come to pick up those groceries and not have to wait as long. The other thing that Open Table's been doing is supporting families who have been newly diagnosed with COVID-19. We receive a phone call from the contact tracing team and reach out to the Neighbor Brigade and other neighbor response groups who come and pick up food from Open Table. We pack the groceries and they bring them to families who need that kind of support. I think one of the messages or one of the lessons Open Table's received is that we have to change. We always, as a nonprofit, as somebody being responsive to people's basic needs, we have to listen to what the need is at the moment, and we have to change to meet that need. And sometimes it's pretty crazy and wild, and we never would have thought of doing it before. And, you know, look who showed up anyway. You have to be open to all possible solutions. And this is what we're calling our hospitality hut. Bertie came to visit, and that's on a pallet jack. I mean, on a pallet, so that can be picked up by our pallet jack and put it in the back of our truck. But we use this in the back of the municipal parking lot so that we can actually, when it's cold and rainy and snowing, we can actually manipulate the technology to put in our order as we look out the window and talk to the guest ordering groceries. And by the time they drive around the parking lot, their groceries are ready to pick up. So that was all done with less than $2,000 and Google Forms. That was the whole system. So we've gotten very, very creative. I thought tonight the most important message I should share with everybody is, you know, when we talk about food insecurity, it doesn't always, not everybody understands what that means. It's not hunger. We don't have people starving necessarily. Sometimes, you know, we just need for people to understand that getting the amount of food you need and the quantity you need so that you can do the rest of your life is what food insecurity is all about. There are ways to get food other than coming to Open Table. If you can't make it there, you can actually ask a neighbor or a friend to pick it up for you. You don't have to leave your car. It's an important message to give to people out there who are thinking about maybe using a pantry service. It's safe. It's all non-contact. It's discreet. Nobody knows you've been there. And by coming to Open Table when you're experiencing tough financial times, you can save your money for other items that you may need. And that's a really important message to explain to people you're working with or to neighbors. We try to make it as easy as possible for people to get the food they need. So thank you for letting me tell you a little bit about what we're doing. I'm learning so much this evening by listening to all of you. I now want to turn it over to Ian Spencer, who works with the Lincoln Police Department.
Thanks, Jeanine. And thank you, Jackie. I do not have any slides, and as an art major, I feel like that's a letdown for everyone. But I hope to communicate this as more of a conversation. I'm going to be covering a lot of information, and I hope it generates some questions at the end. So from a police perspective, we're faced with a worldwide pandemic, a pretty polarized and volatile political climate. And on top of that, on May 25th, we had the murder of George Floyd, and then just a few weeks ago, the incidents at the Capitol. And I think if you isolate any one of those, it's a pretty drastic situation that will strike up some conversations that are enhanced by face-to-face contact, and we just don't have that option right now. And then you couple all of those together, and I'll get into that a little bit more with the school perspective, but in a time where our ability to be physically present, we were unable to do so, and that poses a lot of challenges. But it also kind of, how Jeanine talked about, the adaptability of being able to address the situation at that time. So our enforcement was restricted for a period. Any contact that we could have or that we could avoid, we tried to. Reports were taken over the phone. Instead, we usually had a process of in person as much as possible, but now we switched that. And then from a court perspective, there were several delays. There was suspension of jury trials for quite some time, fairly immediate too at the onset of this in March. They've resumed to a degree starting January 11th, but this creates a huge backlog. So what's happening now, criminal-wise, won't be resolved for several months, if not years, going forward. And there was also a delay in response for our legal process for subpoenas and search warrants. So it delayed investigations, things like that, which just makes the whole, if you're living through these times and you are the victim of a crime, to have an investigation drag out for a lengthy period of time on a good day, have that extended several months, if not years, as a result of this, it just creates a mess. We did see a spike in calls, both in severity for domestic violence, and some of the reasons, it could be desperation, loss of a job, loss of a loved one, and just mainly fear of the unknown. And it's really like a wit's end type of call that we're receiving. And it runs the gamut. I've personally responded to calls from for very young people who are literally, they don't know what to do, to right up the ranks there, right up to really any age. So, which results in an increase for follow-up services as well. We get called when people are going through their worst possible time, and now we're seeing that this time isn't ending. It's just, this is where they've hit their plateau. They can't deal with much more than this, but their situation doesn't change. So with that increase in requests, we've seen an increase in our ability to provide some aid. So we've had to get creative. We partnered, this has been going on for several years now, but we partnered with the COA and with the schools just to see that we have our widest net cast for the ability to provide aid to those people who need it. Kind of jumping into the schools now, very fortunate to work with some incredible social workers, psychologists, administrators, and parents and students. Specifically looking at the high school, we had a series of community-based justice meetings that were coordinated through the Middlesex District Attorney's Office. Those were abandoned for now, in part because there aren't a lot of arraignments or things involving the courts right now due to the pandemic. But that lack of face-to-face time with students is also felt. In speaking with some of the administrators, especially at the high school level, there's a real concern that not being able to see students in an environment, in the school environment, to flag them for how they present, to see what their baseline is, and then to see them when they're in crisis. To not have that has become problematic. And there's quite a level of concern both for us and for the staff of the schools as to what that's going to look like. And I think we've started the preparation as to how that's going to look going forward. So we want to get all the resources we possibly can to handle that in a timely manner, but also have a meaningful resources as well. So then kind of getting down to the middle school, I work very closely with two of just they're incredible people, two school psychologists. And I just want to quote what one of them said. So this isn't real school. So being at school is great for a lot of kids, but it's also not real school, whether you're in person or remote. So even this is a new, strange time in their world. They know that at any minute they could have to go remote, or the whole school could go remote as well. They're broken up into cohorts, and then if a positive test occurs, the whole cohort would have to leave. It's socially isolating. It enhances what worries or anxiety already existed at that age, and it affects the entire family. Raises questions about sickness. Students worry that other family members will get sick and die. Not being able to see family members who are either close by or close friends. Excuse me. And then layered with televised and publicized images that depict racism, political situations. All of these things just lead to that uncertainty and unpredictability, where in a school environment, that should be the least of their worries. So around March, I believe it was like March 13th, that the Lincoln Public Schools went fully remote for the remainder of last school year. And in doing so, we were able to kind of take a look at some inequalities that were occurring with the student population. So approximately 15% of the Lincoln Public School students are not Lincoln residents, and the entire school staff, students are comprised of about 70 different communities. So when we talk about the Lincoln community, it's much more than that. It even goes beyond Massachusetts. So it's really a large swath of individuals who work, live within our boundaries, but it's not just limited to that. So some things that we're working on, some positives that can come from this. We have streamlined a lot of the processes that we are doing at the police station, but also what the schools are doing as well. I will say we're taking a very inward look at our efficiency and how we can, in looking forward, maximize our output and our resources for those who need them. Not just related to COVID, but all the other situations that I listed, communication. This is a big time for law enforcement to listen, and we're doing that, and to educate ourselves. And with some of the trainings and some of the other events, the community-based events that we're part of, we're trending in the right direction. So some of the committees that are out there that we're working with, I've been working with the Lincoln Sudbury Racial Climate Task Force. Since the pandemic, there's been the creation of the Lincoln Schools Anti-Racism Advisory Group, and then the Lincoln Welcome, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Group. So it's these collaborations. It's really understanding just how pliable, creative, and prepared we can be for what comes next. And that's, I think, the focus now is we're here. No one planned on being here, but we're doing it. We're surviving. We're making this work as best we can, and we're addressing the spots that definitely need additional resources. And how do we prepare now for that next phase that comes? So I hope I've covered quite a bit there, but I hope there are some questions that'll be coming, and I know Jackie will be sending some information out with all of our information on it. So with that, I will turn it back to Jackie.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Ian. We do have some questions, but first of all, I need to say I'm just so incredibly proud of the relationships we have in all of these communities. I think those of you who are in the audience, some of you know these people well, others don't. But you get an example of the level of intelligence, the level of compassion, the level of caring that these people bring and the resourcefulness that they bring. I love my job because I have this opportunity to make a difference with people like this. And so I'm just delighted that we have this opportunity to share with you tonight. And some of the questions that have come in, some are a little bit specific. For Ian, this question is, do you find one age group at more rise with all of these issues than others, or is it across the board?
I'd say it's very much across the board. And it's not restricted to one particular age group. I think it's whatever event that an individual is dealing with that will affect the entire family. And what I didn't bring up that I should have was our goal in our collaboration is to close that 24-hour loop. If an event arises at a school during the school day, that's going to affect the family, that's going to affect the community on the other end. So the ability for us to share information with all of the stakeholders is critical. So I bring up the school as one example, but the COA is also another, the Council on Aging. It's really that free flow of information, and it's not restricted to one particular group.
Thank you. One question that is for Jeanine, and I think it's also something I'd love her to touch base on. It's like, how do people access your program? Who can access your program, and what happens if they can't be part of your jurisdiction?
Anybody can access our program. We are specifically set up for 23 towns. They're listed on our website. But if you come to Open Table and need food, we serve you no matter what the first time. If you're from outside of those 23 towns, we take the time to give you the name of the food relief organization in your town. You can also go to a website called Aunt Bertha or 211 or Project Bread or Greater Boston Food Bank. They all have a list where you can look up food relief in your community. And there are no qualifications to come to Open Table. We don't have any. We do register people by the name of their town and how many people are in their family. That's so that we can get the amount of food right, and the Greater Boston Food Bank can track the demographics of the people we serve.
A question, where did the questions go? This question, I think, is for Bethany, and I can answer it a little bit too, is how often do you see people who are conducting abusive behavior reach out for help?
Not as often as people who are experiencing that abuse, but it definitely happens from time to time. And it may not be somebody coming in and that's the primary reason why they're seeking me out, but it might be that it comes up in that conversation. And it comes up when there is that gentle, non-judgmental space for people to ask for the support that they need in the process of our assessment. I will say in other roles that I have played in my work as well, working in residential care and in psychiatric inpatient with kiddos and families, I supported families who had been through domestic violence where it was both the survivor as well as the abuser.
Thank you. Another question. Actually, I should say that we deal primarily with the survivors, so we really don't. DVSN does not necessarily deal with the abusive populations. We tend not to see many who are looking for help. I mean, most of them that are involved in some kind of abuser education, it's usually been mandated by the court. But there are a segment that want to be better. And if they choose to do so, they can, in fact, make a difference. And I will give a plug out to David Adams, who runs an exceptional program, Emerge, which is for abusers who are looking to make a change in their lives. It's also a mandated program by the court, but if someone wants to make that change, working with David Adams at Emerge, which was the first program of its type in the whole United States decades ago, and is still a premier program for sure, one of the best, if not the best. And so we highly recommend that. So if you know of anyone out there who's interested in wanting to change their behavior, I would recommend they go to David Adams at Emerge to follow up on what you answered. Another question. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Add one more piece to that, Jackie. Just thinking back to when I worked in residential care. So I worked primarily with teenage boys. So I would see an entire family. So perhaps I'm thinking of one case in particular, but there were many, where the child grew up watching father abuse mother. And then the father was out of the relationship, and the child had experienced so much trauma and was not able to process through any of that verbally, but was then engaging in the same abusive behaviors toward the mother. And when that is happening and somebody is under the age of 18, we say this is a child who is in need of help. But the second that that person turns 18, they are an adult, and the level of empathy in society changes for what that person has experienced. And again, it's not an either or. There's an and piece here of having the empathy on both sides. And to see the teenagers that I worked with who, with years of just ongoing support and empathy and rebuilding some of their skills of communication, doing the trauma work that needed to be done and therapy, you saw these beautiful changes in their relationships with family members. And I think that's another piece that has really given me hope for that ability to change. But I also look at those children were given the opportunity and the belief that they were on a trajectory to change as well.
Well, thank you. A couple of other questions. One is, how can I get involved with Open Table or the actually Open Brigade, but she means Neighbor Brigade, and who funds Open Table? So this is more of an Open Table focus, but we can all talk about who funds us. So that's good.
Well, we rely on the generosity of the community. We do also write grants. We have fundraisers, but we receive no government funds. Actually, that's not true. We received government funds this year, and also received funds in the past to purchase our truck, which we actually share with the Stowe Food Pantry. We are taking volunteer registrations at all times. Right now, we have to limit the number of people who volunteer at Open Table so that we can volunteer safely. We don't have more than 5 people in a pod, and we love it when families volunteer together because they can be a safe pod together. But yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Bethany, one question for you is, do you deal with nursing home residents?
To a degree, yes. So the way that my job is funded through the town of Sudbury. So any Sudbury resident who is in need can call me and reach out. And we think of my service as being a safety net if somebody doesn't have somewhere else to turn. So if there are services that are offered within the community that we can provide to people, we'll point them in the direction of those resources. If somebody is calling from a nursing home and has experienced abuse or domestic violence or has other needs, we will definitely support them in getting connected with resources.
Well, thank you. I also want to point out that Ian is a really good example of the type of person that we have in our local communities in the policing departments. People who really care about the community, people who really are so incredibly resourceful and collaborative. And Bethany and Ian are both associated with a particular town, but there really are no boundaries for how they interact with those of us who are their colleagues with dealing with clients across all of these borders. And Ian is one of, he's one of the more hopeful people I've seen. He sees some pretty intense things, but nevertheless, he's always, as do Jeanine and Bethany, always have such an incredibly positive outlook about how they're going to make a difference. And so I'd like to ask Ian, what gives you hope going forward?
It's a really good question. I think it's not just hope that I have for the future. I think it's based on the people I work with and the people with whom I collaborate. So, I'm married to a 5th grade special educator, and we kind of share situational things going back and forth, and we have kind of a mutual understanding that the work that we're doing, we couldn't picture ourselves doing anything else. And to not only live with a like-minded person, but to also work and collaborate with other like-minded people. I think the work that we're doing is to improve the quality of people's lives. And, based on the years that I've been working, and we can actually see that happen. So I think that gives me hope and renewed frequently.
Thank you very much. Now I'll have one last question that we have here. As the pandemic recedes and we establish some level of normality, what challenges do you anticipate? Does anybody want to jump into that?
I don't mind jumping into that. I think, in speaking with the schools and other organizations, I think based on the current situation where people are restricted, movements restricted right now, we're doing the best we can with what we have, but I know as far as from what the schools have provided me, this is the calm before the storm. And I think just to have a good preparation in place for the services that will be expected going forward, and that's across the board. So I think, continuing to collaborate, continuing to identify our weak spots, and seeing, not being afraid to ask for help to fill those will be huge going forward.
Well, we have a good question that just came into the chat, which I think fits in right with what you were just saying. Have you been in contact with Acton or other town officers working with school-based issues at all? And this person is asking because they wonder how best practices are being shared.
Sure. And I saw that Dot Butler was here, but had to leave. So I'm fortunate to be part of a regional school-based threat and response system. So that's through the Northeast Massachusetts Law Enforcement Council. It's a group of school administrators, psychologists, also with a large group of police officers, school resource officers. And our main goal is to respond to critical incidents involving schools. So it's really flood the school with resources if there's an event there. And then just kind of work through whatever the event is. But we also collaborate. We talk about situations going on in each other's community. So yes, there are regional detective meetings as well. There are Dan Perenick from Winchester PD is also an incredible resource at organizing large groups of officers to see, let's meet, let's discuss what everybody's seeing, because if one community is seeing something right now, it's inevitably going to hit the other. So that collaboration is ongoing even during the pandemic, which I'm quite pleased to report.
Let me ask you this one last question, perhaps, in that certainly one of the scrutinized items today is school resource officers and having police in the schools. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as benefits of having resource officers in the schools?
Yeah, and I think what's unique to both Lincoln and Sudbury, it's our presence in the schools is in no way a punitive or a power throw. It's more of, here's a community resource, use this as you see fit. And that's also, that's both for the students, faculty, and community members. So what we've been doing has been quite organic. We've, the ability to talk with students in one-on-one. I go into wellness classes all the time at the high school, and it's really just an open forum. And ask what you need to ask, and I'm going to give you the truth. And if I don't know the answers that to the questions you're asking, I will research and get back to you. But it's really that the ability to remove the stigma of the uniform from the person, and what what's really there is the crux of the reasons for a law enforcement member to be in your school. We are here for you. We are we are a community member, and we're not here just to enforce laws. It's really the educational component is.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, because that's been my experience in the towns I've worked with. The resource officers have been very valuable in that regard, and a partner, not so much enforcing laws, but really providing services and understanding and building relationships. And that's what we try to do with officers and our advocates, is to have them train together, learn together, and find common ground. And so I really do support the programs, but I do understand the concerns other people might have because they haven't had this kind of an experience that we've been benefited by. I don't see any more questions. Oh, wait a minute. Do I see one? Okay, let's see. Having worked almost 40 years at Transition House, one of the earliest domestic violence shelters, restraining orders were just being established. It's both saddening that the problem continues to exist, but it's inspiring to hear of the ways that such a variety of linked services are linking up to address the complexity of the problem. Thank you all for what you do and the ways that you do it.
Nice.
That's a nice way to segue. And thank you very much for that wonderful person who offered that comment. I think it's a good way for us to close out today. I just can't say enough. Again, I've said it before. I just adore working with these people. And there's so many out there that are really doing this hard work and very caring work, and it's grueling. But we all really love working together and being resourceful and making the difference that we can make. It's been tremendous. So I want to thank Jeanine, Bethany, Ian for being here with us tonight and sharing what they've shared. I also would like to thank all of you who have been here that came tonight and took your time to be with us to learn a little bit more about domestic violence. Many of you are supportive of us in so many ways, so I'm saying thank you, even though I cannot see you personally. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Every one of you, this is a reminder, who registered will receive a recording of this presentation, a list of resources related to the topics discussed, and the contact information of the people who spoke with us tonight. So I again say thank you for all of you who were here. And if you can't hear the applause, just imagine it's there because I'm feeling it for you. So thank you very, very much. And at that, I think we're going to call it an evening.